On April 24th, 1954, Wesley Cook was born in Philadelphia to William and Edith Cook. He had a relatively unknown childhood, but one day in his sophomore year, his Swahili teacher decided to give his students African and Arabic names to use in the classroom. The name given to him was Mumia, which was told to him to mean prince, and was also a common name of fighters in the Mau Mau uprising. Around that same time, he was also angry at the presidential campaign of George Wallace, even heading to a rally of his to protest, leading to him being beaten by the rally-goers and a police officer, which very quickly radicalized him, dropping out of high school to join the Black Panther Party, not just aiding his local branch, but even working for more nationwide branches in Oakland and New York, which ended up leading to Mumia to become a person of interest via COINTELPRO. He'd end up leaving the Black Panther Party in 1970, trying to go back to high school, but would be kicked out for distributing literature calling for Black revolutionary student power, so he would be forced to get his GED, then briefly enrolling in Goddard College. Around that same time, he had his first son, and had made the decision to not only give him the name Jamal, but also change his chosen surname from Cook to Abu-Jamal, so his name was now Mumia, father of Jamal. Mumia would soon start a career in journalism, working for multiple Philadelphia-based news organizations, focusing on African American news. One group that kept appearing in his coverage was MOVE, an anarcho-primitivist and black liberation organization, known for their frequent clashes with the police, specifically the trial of 9 members for the murder of police officer James Ramp. Ultimately, he'd be let go from most of the journalist jobs he had due to biases in favor of MOVE. The only remaining one was his job at WDAS, due to it being an independent black-owned organization at the time. But since the income from that job wasn't enough to support one family, let alone the 3 he now had to support due to remarriages, he would also get a job driving a cab. However, that job would soon end up leading to a massive change in Mumia's life. On December 9th, 1981, 3:55 a.m., a traffic stop was conducted by Officer Daniel Faulkner. The person he stopped was a young man named William Cook, Mumia's younger brother. Soon, the two would start having an altercation that was seen by Mumia doing his cab route. What happened next was a little unclear, but when the smoke cleared, Faulkner was dead from a gunshot wound to the head, and Mumia was shot in the stomach, with 5 spent rounds around him alongside a weapon and an empty shoulder holster. After he was healed, he was taken into custody awaiting trial. A trial that would begin on June 17th of the following year. A trial that would be a bit complicated. Originally, Mumia was granted permission to represent himself, with attorney Anthony E. Jackson appointed as counsel, but Judge Albert F. Sabo declined it. He also denied Mumia receiving counsel from MOVE leader John Africa, with these kind of clashes continuing during the trial proper, the prosecution putting out 4 witnesses to the incident itself. Albert Magilton, a pedestrian who saw Mumia approach the officer before turning away prior to the actual murder, Michael Scanlon, an intoxicated person who vaguely saw the incident but could not remember full details of the shooter, Cynthia White, a prostitute who was on a curb half a block away when she saw the incident, and Robert Cobert, another cabbie who was allegedly parked behind William during the shooting, alongside producing 2 security guards in the hospital who allege that Mumia had stated while recovering, "I shot the motherfucker and I hope the motherfucker dies." The defense would produce some witnesses of their own. Another prostitute named Veronica Jones, who simply stated, "All I seen was two men and a policeman on the ground, and what else can I say? I was kind of intoxicated." Desi Hightower, a pedestrian who claimed to have seen a man fleeing the incident before other officers arrived, but mostly had to rely on character witnesses like poet Sonia Sanchez, who stated Mumia was viewed by the black community as a creative, articulate, peaceful, genial man. The trial would last for 16 days, and after deliberation, the jury would reach a verdict. Mumia was guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. While being sentenced, Mumia would decry the process of his trial, particularly his legal defense team, calling them inadequate to the task and chose to follow the directions of this black-robed conspirator, Albert Sabo, even if it meant ignoring my directions. And for most, that's where the case would end. But not for Mumia, as it seems the discussion around the case would continue massively after the sentencing. First came an immediate appeal of the sentencing, which would lead to some to re-examine the evidence of the case. And when more information came out, things got seemingly less black and white than the trial had stated, such as the fact that prosecutors kept bringing up Mumia's political activism rather than focusing on the case itself, the fact that despite the massive black population of Philly, only 2 of the jurors on the case were black, the fact that the statements of the 2 security guards contradicted both the doctors who treated Mumia and the officer who brought Mumia in initially, who stated that the Negro male made no comments. Veronica Jones saying that she was approached by the police to corroborate Cynthia White's story and was basically pushed into giving the most tepid defense of Mumia out of fear of getting 5 to 15 years in prison. A police informant named Pamela Jenkins stating that she was also pressured to claim that Mumia killed Faulkner and that White was being tailed by police officers as late as 1997. The fact that Robert Colbert being at the scene was not only contradicted by another prosecution witness, but also people would discover that he was an unlicensed driver at the time due to an arson charge and was in talks with the prosecutors to possibly get his driving privileges back after this case was settled, getting a statement from a court stenographer named Terry Maurer Carter, who would come out and state that Judge Sabo had stated in reference to Mumia's case specifically,
"I'm going to help them fry the nigger."
Even the human rights organization Amnesty International published a report going over many details of the case, but one particular area they questioned was the fact that there was no forensic report to determine if the gun that was found on Mumia was shot recently or not. Want this case to get even more complicated? While Mumia had maintained his innocence, at various points afterwards, there were others who claimed responsibility for what happened. In 1999, a man named Arnold Beverly had made the claim in an affidavit that members of the Philadelphia police force hired him as a hitman to kill Faulkner because he was trying to clean up the police force. And all the way in 2001, William Cook would make his first ever statement on the case. He was not called to testify in the trial initially because he stated the night of the incident, "I ain't got nothing to do with this." But now, William Cook was making the claim that a man named Kenneth Freeman was in the passenger seat, and he was the one who killed Faulkner. And, in a very interesting development, Kenneth Freeman was long dead, having died under mysterious circumstances the night of the MOVE headquarters bombing. Not in the bombing itself, mind you, in a separate incident the same night. All of these compounding factors have led to Mumia to become a bit of a cultural icon in and of himself. A massive Free Mumia movement sprouting, demanding for Mumia to be released from jail, arguing that the case was politically motivated and didn't meet the right standards of a fair trial. Sentiment echoed by Mumia himself, who stated, "At my trial, I was denied the right to defend myself. I had no confidence in my court-appointed attorney, who never even asked me what happened the night I was shot and the police officer was killed, and I was excluded from at least half the trial. Since I was denied all my rights at my trial, I did not testify. I would not be used to make it look like I had a fair trial. Despite the pressure, it seemed that concerns fell on deaf ears. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania rejected his appeal on March 6, 1989, and had also rejected possibly rehearing the case, which would lead to Mumia's allies taking the case to the Supreme Court of the United States, who would deny his writ of certiorari in 1990, and would reject their appeals for a rehearing in 1991, leading to the governor at the time, Tom Ridge, to officially sign Mumia's death warrant. It was during this time where we got the many confessions and recanted testimonies, which led to more questions regarding Mumia's case. Meanwhile, Mumia was using the opportunity that he had to continue activism in politics, publishing an essay in 1991, giving commentary on the death penalty, writing essays in the German publication Junge Welt, writing multiple books, being floated as a possible VP nominee for the Green Party, and also doing radio shows for Prison Radio and Democracy Now!, with his radio shows being frequently suppressed by the guards, even to the point where he was pushed into solitary confinement for his activities outside of prison. 1 year later, Mumia was interviewed for a documentary called Mumia Abu-Jamal, A Case for Reasonable Doubt, which would lead to the prison to forbid any future visits from documentarians, which would simply add more fuel to the fire for those who did support Mumia, leading to a legal battle about whether or not Mumia had the legal right to do these endeavors while incarcerated. A case that he would end up winning, a rarity, as all cases regarding Mumia's actual sentencing kept being dismissed. That was until December 6 of 2005, when the Third Circuit Court of Appeals had admitted 4 issues worthy of appeal in the case. 1. Whether or not the jury's verdict had been flawed due to the judge's instructions being confusing, which brings the sentencing into question. 2. Whether the prosecutor improperly attempted to ease the jurors by indicating their ruling was open to appeal, which brings the conviction into question. 3. Whether there was significant racial bias in the jury, which brings the conviction and sentencing into question, and whether or not the appeals of the case also had racial biases, which brings the post-conviction review into question. At this time, the case actually looked very promising for Mumia. Not every element of the case was on his side, the racial bias element of the case was being denied, but there seemed to be enough there to warrant the continuation of the death sentence's vacancy. And that's when in 2011, the case would receive its biggest change, where the prosecution announced that they would no longer seek the death penalty and would accept a sentence of life in prison because Faulkner's widow said that she did not have the energy to go through another lengthy trial, but that she was heartened by the thought that he will finally be taken from the protective cloister that he has been living in all these years and begin living among his own kind, the thugs and common criminals that infest our prisons. Since both sides saw this as a short-term victory, this is what ultimately was chosen to be the new sentencing: life in prison with no chance for parole. For the pro-Mumia side, this simply moved the goalposts, so now the plan is to try and get this sentence revoked as well, especially since at this point in time, Mumia's health was starting to fail, it being found out that he had contracted hepatitis C while being imprisoned, and despite multiple attempts to try to get his medical issues sorted, the prison seemed unwilling to do anything. But all this did was seemingly just restart the process of rejection, especially for those who wanted a full retrial of the case. The closest that there had been to any of this process changing was around the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, as Mumia had contracted COVID while also needing to undergo heart surgery for blocked arteries, which seemed to make the concerns of Mumia's life conditions in prison noticeable enough to have Pennsylvania consider looking back at his case. But in 2023, his most recent appeal has been rejected. And as of now, that's where Mumia remains, behind bars for a crime that he might not have even committed. Will that be where he dies? I don't know, but people thought something similar would happen to Leonard Peltier, and sure enough, he walks free today. Perhaps the same fate will befall Mumia. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the bell to find a future video mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, consider supporting me on Patreon.